Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir Samach Hey, our very almost last daf. Okay, we will be starting at the siyum at the top of Samach Vav Amud Aleph. I think it could be, you have to check if you're going to a siyum to make sure that they're teaching the whole daf. If not, you can listen, if you're interested, the last 10 minutes from minute 38 of Nazir 65 from last time. Last time, apparently, I also did it on the day before. So you can find in the last 10 minutes of Nazir 65 that's up on the site. So if you look at from the previous cycle, you can find it. If you search Nazir 65, you'll find it. The last 10 minutes are that. So if you're going to a siyum where they're only starting, the more natural place to start, if you're not planning to the whole daf, would be the Mishnah at the bottom of Samach Vav. I will tell you that the end of our Masechet is kind of nice. After all this stuff of purity and impurity, we're going to talk about Shmuel and his Nazirut, and the Gemara is actually going to not even relate to that and go off on a total different tangent. We'll try to figure out how those things are all connected. So very interesting way to end the Masechet, even though I know these last dapim have not been so simple. We didn't even say last dapim. We've been a while in a section that might be a little bit complicated. Okay. Today's daf is sponsored by Avi Sasland in memory of Rabbi Henry Sasland, Zechrono Livracha, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow. He always pushed his family to have a project to study something on the side of everything we were doing. Dad and I are learning today, help give your neshama and aliyah. Today's daf is sponsored by Becky Goldstein, in loving memory of Avram ben Shlomo on his 6th yahrzeit, a trailblazer who through his avat Torah and burning desire to spread it wherever he could, founded the Elazar English Kollel, providing English with an avenue to delve into the world of the Talmud and sharing his great passion. I have the zchut to be learning my daf with his Gemara, and each day his memory and his comments inspire me to reach greater heights. I thank Hashem for this great gift of an Eved Hashem, my husband's chabruta, and a wonderful friend, Yehi Zechro Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Kalani in honor of Nancy Kalani on her birthday tomorrow. I'm so glad we set out on this daf Yomi journey together. I love our chabrutot and hope to celebrate many more siyums with you. Okay, beautiful dedications. With that, we will get started. Starting back on the Mishnah in Samach Daled Amud Bet, we're now talking about a law about removing graves that you find on the way, some place where you weren't expecting, there was really not a cemetery, and we want to be able to move the bones. The idea of moving the bones is to prevent having impurity in all sorts of areas that people aren't expecting impurity. You know, you get to a cemetery, that's tummy, right? We have to worry about kohanim who don't want to become impure. We have to worry about all sorts of people in those days who tried to they kept themselves in a state of purity all the time. Okay, there were people who were concerned about this. We talked about them at all different points. We're not going to really get into why they did that now, but talked about it in other times. By the way, one thing I was thinking is I'm pretty sure that, in fact, I know there is, I just didn't have a chance to look it up, but anyone can try to search it. Suli Mishkan had a whole article about burial caves and all that, and I would be in flashback, and it would be relevant to find it again and open it on today's daf. So if I can find it, I'll maybe send the link out later. If not, you can find it and send it around, but that would be also valuable to understand how people were buried in those days and read more about it. So I'm going back to the Mishnah. You find a dead body. We read this yesterday, but we'll do it again. What we're going to see, I want you to also pay attention to the words, because what the first thing the Gemara is going to do is make drashot on this as if it was a pasuk in the Torah. Like we said, this word comes to exclude this. This word comes to exclude that. So we're going to darshan on the first few words. Hamotzei, meit, mushkav, kedarko. Okay, which is we find a dead body. B'tchila means we didn't know about it before. And mushkav, lying down, kedarko, in its way. We're going to talk about what all this means. Notzlo ve'et tefusato. We pick it up, the body, when we want to remove it. We can remove it if we want. We don't have to be, but we can remove it. And you take the tefusa. Okay, I think I said something, I'm not sure if I said it was 3 hands breadth, but it's not 3 hands breadth, it's 3 fingers. We're going to talk about that later. If I said it yesterday incorrectly by accident, I'm correcting myself. If I didn't, then good. But you take the dirt underneath and you move it with the body. So we'll talk about what exactly this is. We're going to see 2 tannaitic opinions about actually what you take. Shnayim, if you find 2, same thing. Notzlan ve'et tefusatan. Matzah shlosha. Once you find 3, this is classic in halacha. 3 is a chazaka. We assume 3 already means this isn't just b'mikre, coincidentally, someone happened to bury someone and another person buried someone else. But you find 3 people. If you have to check, yesh bein zeh lezeh me'arba amot bad shmoneh. This also is all about how there's some diagrams. If you have a Schottenstein, there's diagrams about how the burial caves are actually built in those days. There's some description about it in the Rishonim. Whether they know exactly or not is a good question, right? But they used to bury in these caves. Again, we have proofs in Beit Sha'arim and things like that, how these burial caves look. I don't know if all the measurements match up. But basically there was a space of 4 to 8 in the middle, and then the bodies would be on the side of that. The point is that the way it seems, the simple reading is, if they're spread out more than 4 cubits from each other, that's too far, right? And if they're within 8 cubits, that was generally the space in which people did it. Again, you can look at different diagrams. They might describe things a little differently. Unclear exactly how to understand these measurements. If you see it like that, and they're within a certain distance from each other, we assume that that was a burial, whether you call it a cemetery or you say it was a burial cave. And then you could assume that there are other burial caves in the area, or it could be there's other bodies that were still part of this burial cave in the area, and therefore you have a responsibility. You have to check 20 amot. It sounds like in a radius of 20 amot around where you are. If you find another one at the end of the 20 cubits, then you have to check from there. Here comes the big word, That's why this mission is here, because it's another case of raglayim l'davar. Since you already have proof that there's these, we can assume there's more. Therefore, you have a responsibility to check, because again, you have to designate and say, all this area is a cemetery. But if you find it without all the others, then you can take it out. Why that sentence is mentioned there, I don't really know. Seems a little bit strange because we already said that, but that's the way to explain it. Now we're going to start excluding a bunch of different cases from this based on drashot on the words of the Mishnah. Like I said, more sounds like they're darshaning the Torah. They're really darshaning the words of the Mishnah. The tricky part of this next section is that they're saying, this comes to exclude that, this comes to exclude that, this comes to exclude that. The problem was, the Mishnah had a bunch of halachot. Number one, you're allowed to move plots, right? Versus when you can't, and you can assume it's a burial spot, right? Then we had, you have to remove it with the tefusa. So it's going to be unclear exactly which halacha is being, this is being excluded from what halacha. We're going to talk about it right now, but I'll already tell you that there's a number of different commentaries on all of these things. Okay, we'll try to maybe follow the rush, and then we'll at least take one commentary through to the end here. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, matzah prat lamatzui. Matzah means you found it, meaning you didn't know it was there, which comes to exclude if you knew it was there. If you knew it was there, the assumption here is that you didn't know it was there, right? Maybe it was in the center, right? Maybe it was in the outskirts of the city, where nobody was living 100 years ago. Now it's the center of town, and all of a sudden you find this burial, this guy buried. That's not a very good place, so you can remove it. But if you knew it was there, it meant it was done intentionally, and intentionally for it to be here, right? Could be also someone died on the way and they couldn't bury them, and they just buried them right there. So then you can remove it. But if it was known, right? So then the question is, what can't you do? So the Rush says, Perish HaRashbam, Prat liyadua she'im echad mehem yadua u'shnayim tchila ein lem shchuna. He says it comes to exclude something else. He says what it's telling you is you can't say these three are a group if there was a difference between some were known and some weren't known, which is actually something that's going to come up in the Gemara later. That if you find one that was known it was there, and then another two that weren't known they were there, you don't call that a shchuna kfara, which actually is kind of logical. Because again, if it was there and you knew about it, then it was probably intentional. And the ones that weren't known about were probably unintentional. Or perhaps they were old ones from 100 years ago. And therefore, we're not going to say, oh, 2 from 100 years ago and 1 from now, that means a shchunat kfarot, right? A shchunat kfarot is we decided we're burying everybody here. So that's not a shchunat kfarot. So it could be that that's the logic. Anyway, so it's unclear, again, what we're excluding from here. Mate, mate comes to exclude someone who was murdered. Why is someone murdered different? So the Rush tells us, mate, and what law isn't true for the harug? That's also a good question. It doesn't have tefusa and it doesn't have shchuna, which actually means you can remove the body. You don't even need to bring the tefusa with it, all the dirt underneath. And it's not counted as a shchuna. If you find 3 people murdered, that's not a shchuna. Okay, where do we learn this from? He says, mishum de kechaser dami. It's like a body that's missing parts, like a body that wasn't buried whole. We talked about a long time ago. We talk about it again today. And the truth is, don't ask me why. It's a gemire. That means it's a tradition. It's halacha l'moshe misinai that if it's missing body parts, doesn't need tefusa. And that's what they're saying here. If it's murdered, it's the same as that. Next, mushkav prat liyoshev. Lying down comes to say other than if the body's sitting upward. Kidarko, in its way, prat l'shelosho munach ben yerechotav. means that the body's lying down rather than the head is in between the legs, right? It's not sitting and it's not leaned forward. Why these? We'll talk about in 1 minute. Here's the halacha that I just mentioned and that we saw in the rush, that Ula Bar Chanina says, if the body's missing parts, you don't need tefusa, you don't count this as a cemetery plot. What about, now they're referring back to the two that I didn't really go into yet, so I'll talk about them now. Not sitting and not lying with your head between your legs. Why? Probably it's a Gentile, because Jews weren't buried in those ways. Okay, there's books that talk about like why Jews are buried, how Jews used to be buried, and there were particular positions with their hands over their arms over their heart, with their legs spread out. That was the way they used to bury people in those days, and therefore you knew by the way the people were buried whether if they're not Jewish. So I specifically didn't say so what if they're not Jewish, then what? Okay, obviously we don't say it's shkunat parot. There's no tumah of Gentiles. So it's not tameh. We don't move them, right? And you certainly don't bring the tefusa with them. So anyway, these are a bunch of exceptions to the rule. Matzah shnayim. Rosho shel zeh b'tzad margalot hav shel zeh. V'rosho shel zeh b'tzad margalot hav shel zeh. Each head is opposite the feet of the other, meaning they're both lying in the same. Let's say they're both lying down, but one is facing this way and one is facing that way, and the head of each is next to the legs of the other. So this is also not a way that we bury Jews. Jews are buried both in the same direction, with the head in one place and the legs in the other spot. They're buried kind of next parallel to each other. And therefore, if you find them like that, so these laws don't apply. So tefusa, you don't carry the stuff underneath with them. Okay, the idea of taking the earth underneath is that the assumption is that the liquids that came from the body got seeped into the earth and other things that were around, and therefore you have to remove them with the body because it's still impurity from a dead body. Matzah shlosha, echad yedua u'shnayim tchila. One was known about, this I mentioned before, and two were not known about. And you just found them now. Shnayim tchila v'shnayim yeduim. It should be echad tchila v'shnayim yeduim, or the opposite. One you just found now, and two you knew were there before. So this whole law of tefusa and shkunat parot doesn't apply. So a case like this happened. Rabbi Yesheva found two that they knew they were there before, and then they found another one randomly. And he wanted to say, you can't remove any of these bodies. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says to him, all your efforts to prevent people from moving these bodies, from removing them, is totally unnecessary. You're wrong about your halacha. When they said shkunat kfarot, they meant it has to be three that were either known to us or three that were not known to us. Okay, and therefore you can't. Right? There's an aleph if you notice, by the word yiduin, because didn't we just say it's only applicable if it wasn't yiduin, right? If it was, you didn't know about them, because otherwise, if you knew, then probably they meant to be there. So there's a debate about this, and now you can see the aleph sends you to the graph who says tevot elu b'chukot. Erase these words; they don't belong here, and it really just means only if they were found, and not if they were there and you knew about them. So there's a debate about this, and you see it in the girsa right here, because that went back to the beginning. Matzah prat lematzoi. What is that excluding? It's not clear which parts of it it's excluding. Next, hechidami tefusa. Okay, notlan ve'tefusatan. So now we're going to talk about tefusa. The question is hechidami tefusa. Now, hechidami, this is a very confusing masechet if you want to learn terminology from, because often the terminology is used here. Same words can be used in a different meaning than they're normally used. So hechidami normally means what is the case. So you assume we're going to get to, okay, how does it work? How does tefusa work? And we're going to get to, I mentioned already, the machlokes tannaitic, but that's not what they're going to do right now. They're actually going to find a source in the text for it. Where do we know from the Torah there's a law of tefusa? And it introduces it by hechidami, even though it really should be menahane mile. Another proof that this wasn't a well-edited masechet. So hechidami tefusa. Among Rav Yehuda Malcha, pasuk says, according to Rav Yehuda, unisatani mimitzrayim. This is Yaakov. Yaakov is going to get buried. Right before he dies, he says to Yosef, don't bury me in Egypt. Unisatani mimitzrayim. Take me out from Egypt. Okay, so now he says, right, I want to be buried in Marad HaMachpelah with my fathers. I didn't say the words Marad HaMachpelah, but he says I want to be buried with my fathers. Soon in Sota, we're going to get to the whole story when he gets buried by Yosef, and crazy things happen. We'll get there in Sota, a little promo. What does he say? Take me from Mitzrayim. He could have just said, Unisatani, right? Take me to Israel, right? Take me to the burial plot of my fathers. Why do you have to say from Mitzrayim? Chol imi, take with me dirt from Egypt. I just taught this in the Hebrew and I wasn't paying attention, but someone asked after class, but wait, wasn't Yaakov taken directly? He wasn't buried in Mitzrayim and then taken. This seems to be talking about tefusa, which is if you're buried and you remove the bones, you move them somewhere else, right? But Yaakov was taken directly to Mitzrayim. That's the story we're going to see in Sota for sure, right? They took him right away. They all left and they went to bury him. And then what happened, you'll see. But it's very strange that we're learning tefusa from someone who wasn't even buried there. So I looked up the brief time I had in between, and I saw that there's commentary that says that he thought he was going to be buried in Egypt. He didn't realize that they were going to be able to leave right away because, again, he needed to get permission, right? So he didn't realize they were going to leave right away. And he said, if you're going to bury me here, make sure to take dirt with me from Egypt. Again, it's all a drasha. So it doesn't really matter what the truth is and what happened there. It's a drasha, and drashot have the poetic license to take a pasuk out of context entirely. So, but if you want to understand it somewhat in context, that's a way to understand it somewhat in context. V'kama shiur tefusa. Now they get to the question that we thought the hechidami was, which is, how much do you have to take? How much tefusa? Peresh Rabbi Elazar. Okay, we're going to see a few mistakes in the text today. Here's one of them. It says Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, but you definitely have to get rid of Rabbi Tzadok because Rabbi Elazar is an Emorah. We're going to see it in a minute. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok is a Tana. In a minute, we're going to quote Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok as a question on Rabbi Elazar. So it can't possibly be it's the same person because they're going to quote it with a meitivei. Meitivei means question on an Emorah from a tannaitic source. And this is a very obvious kind of mistake, which is the scribe was copying the text and he saw Rabbi Elazar and his eye jumped to the second Rabbi Elazar and wrote Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok by accident. So it's really Rabbi Elazar, who's the Emorah from Israel. You take all the soft ground around and you dig down in virgin soil 3 etzbaot, 3 fingers breadths. Okay? That deep. Because the assumption is, right, it's not very deep. The assumption is that the liquids from the body seep into the ground around, so you have to take all that with you. Meitive, but wait, it's tannaitic source that says otherwise. Describes tefusa in a very different way. V'kama shiur tefusa. Peresh Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. Here comes the Emorah. Notel takismin ve'etaksasot. You take the pieces of wood that chipped off from the coffin. You see they buried in wooden coffins. And the ksasot, which is the chunks of ground that are there, chunks of earth. V'zorek et havadaim. You see if there's some parts that clearly had nothing to do with impurity and aren't impure, you throw them aside. Uminiach et hasfekot. Okay, stuff you're not sure about. In other words, there's things you're sure that kind of the stuff seeped in. There's stuff you aren't sure, right? For sure yes, for sure no, and then sfekot. So sfekot you put aside in some, they say like hidden place possibly. Like you move it somewhere else, but you don't have to take it with the body. And the rest, whatever's left, whatever you're taking of the body, is considered, the bones are considered bones. And the rov binyan of the body will, if you're missing like a shiur, you can add it to another, if you're putting it near another body, then this is a very strange line. It's a little unclear exactly what all this means. And if there's rakav, then that'll go together with rakav somewhere else. If you're missing a ladle full, you can join those two together. Question, can you join rakav and all that? But I'm not going to get into that. And some of the commentaries say this seems to contradict the fact that we said rakav can't be joined, but we did say if you have rakav from one dead body and you have rakav from another, there was an opinion that said you could join them. Okay. In any case, the point of that braita wasn't the whole last part, which is a little hard to understand, but the beginning part, which is tefusa, is something different than Rabbi Elazar said. So the answer is, right, if you're an Emorah and someone questions you from a tannaitic source, you can say, I hold by a different Tana. So that's what we're going to say. He holds like a different Tana. Tanya, as it says in the braita. Now we're going to see exactly what he said. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum ben Azai. Okay, it's actually a little weird. Rabbi Yochanan appears in this braita. I didn't look that up. It seems like maybe there's a mistake there. But in any case, it said in the name of Ben Azai, who's a Tana. Notel aparti choch v'chofer bebetula shalosh etzbaot. Exactly the way he described it. You take the soft earth from underneath and then you dig down in the virgin soil underneath 3 fingers breadths, and that's it. But they came in, moving now to the to Amud Bet, and further on in the Mishnah. You now have to check 20 cubits to see, are there dead people around? Amalava. Badak upinam, badak ve'eshka. What if you checked, you found a dead body, you removed the dead body. Then you found another dead body and you removed it. That was all permitted. Then you find a third. Now you have a question. Number one, there's now 3 graves here, even though there aren't any more though, right? So it's a little weird. Right now you only have 1. So is this a shchunat kfarot? And secondly, do you have to bring the bodies back because you really weren't allowed to remove them, even though you were at the time you found them, but now it turns out you really shouldn't have removed them. So the answer is lo hai mefane legabe hanach trei. The third one is not allowed to be removed on account that you already removed 2, and now it's kind of a lone body. No, we don't treat it like a lone body. But these 2 don't need to be brought back on account of that 1. Okay, first of all, we know we don't like to move dead bones, dead bodies at all. So it makes sense that since you did it, a heter, this is a good example, you were permitted to do something. So we allow it to what you did was good, so it's fine, you leave it. But that's the first version of Rava. Ikeda Amre, Amarava, some people say that Rava said, period. So now some people say, well, since you were allowed to remove the first 2, and now the third one is by itself, you can remove that one as well. So now, right, this is assuming, right, you checked your 20 cubits, I think, and you didn't find anything, I believe. But then you can remove it. So now the Gemara says, but isn't this a shchunat parot? How do you do that? Amar Rish Lakish, ila matzu v'tiaru eretz Yisrael. A very, very interesting line. He says, look, we didn't want to turn all of Israel into graveyards, right? And create problems for, number one, kohanim, as I said, and also people who were very careful to keep themselves in a state of purity. So because of that, we want to keep Israel. And then, by the way, this would only be halacha in Israel, right? We want to keep Israel. And the truth is, I didn't look up whether all these halachot are only in Israel, because again, outside of Israel, there's more of a chance it's not even Gentile. So probably it's only a halacha in Israel. They wanted to purify the land of Israel, so they were lenient in this case. Next thing, badak. Now, remember what I said about the mistake before with Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok. We might possibly have another kind of mistake like that coming up, a different type though. Badak me'esrim amav lo matzamai. What if you check 20 cubits and you don't find anything? Now, if you don't read further on, you assume, what does he mean? He means it doesn't matter. It's still a shchunat kfarot, and you can't remove any of the bodies because, okay, you have 3. 3 is your magic number. But the next line seems to totally contradict that. My timer, what's the reason? Because they wanted to be lenient, and therefore what? Right? It should be, therefore, it's not a shchunat kfarot, right? So some people understand shchunat kfarot meaning something different that actually means a leniency, and they try to explain that in some different kind of way. But the Rosh basically says that those words shouldn't be here. And then again, it would be a mistake that the scribe accidentally looked up a line instead of, in the other case, he looked down the line and possibly copied this line by accident, and it doesn't really belong here. So if you get rid of that line, it makes a lot more sense, and that's what the Rosh does. Whether or not that's the truth, I don't know. Perhaps shchunat kfarot means something else here, and maybe it is some sort of a leniency. Okay, that maybe the shchunat kfarot is only here. You don't have to worry about any other space. You could come up with some other, the commentaries have other different explanations, but it's definitely a complicated text to understand. So we kind of started our Gemara here with something that was a little hard to understand, which is what is being excluded from all these things that wasn't so clear. And now at the end, this seemingly leniency, which really is a stringency, doesn't really make so much sense either. There's a lot left to be explained, which again is explained in various different ways. These are parts of the Gemara that again are confusing, not because concepts are confused, well, maybe the concepts, but also the wording doesn't really express well enough what really is meant. And therefore it's very much open to interpretation, which kind of happens on almost every page of Gemara, but some more than others. New Mishnah. We're now going to jump topics. Okay, you would think that we're jumping topics as a raglayim ledavar. This one is actually a little bit different. So this isn't exactly. I just want to answer your question. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok is a Tana. It's Rabbi Elazar without Rabbi Tzadok who's an Amora. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok is a Tana. That's him. Yeah, he's a Tana. Okay, so now we're going to get into other safek topics. This actually seems to be similar to the safek if you were in the water with the kever tahom and you were already tameh, so you're going to continue to be tameh. If you were tahor, you're continuing to be tahor. This sounds very similar. And then the next Mishnah is going to have two different cases with raglayim l'davar, continuing in this raglayim l'davar that we've been discussing, that we've been seeing in the Mishnah. So kol safek, again, we saw it in the Mishnah before, and we saw it in our Mishnah today, right? Once you find, you have to check 20 cubits. Once you find one within 20 cubits, then raglayim l'davar, you have to check another 20 cubits because this must be an area where there was a cemetery. If you're a kohen and you're supposed to determine if someone has a negat tzara, now there's different cases of safek here. What we seem to be talking about is either I had 2 leprous marks and the kohen was putting me in quarantine to see what happens to them. Okay, one of the rules of a leprous mark is if it has to be the size of a grease, which is like a certain type of grain, forget exactly how you define it, but they talk about a sela, which is a coin, the shape of a coin, just smaller than a grease. And then it has to be, if it starts, let's say, as a sela and then grows to a grease. Okay, so that will be an indication that it's a leprous mark. It has to at least get to the size of a grease. Now, what if you have 2 leprous marks and he checked basically, the size of each one and who, which one was which. And then what you want to see after 7 days is that it spreads. Let's say one was already a grease and one was less than a grease. And, you're waiting for other things as well. But you want to see, one of the things you want to see is that it spread over the 7 days. It got bigger. And then when you want to have it become tahol, you want to see that it shrunk to the original size. It has to go back to the original size it was in order to make you pure. So you're always checking the size, but let's say you got confused between 2 leprous marks on one person, or 2 people came to you and you weren't sure which one. When they come back a week later, you forget that you didn't take your records, right? Like you think about a doctor and how they have to write everything down. You didn't check well enough. You didn't write which one was which. Okay, so now you don't know, did it get bigger? Because if one had one that was already the size of a grease and one had one that was less than a grease, and the one that got, right now you see one's a grease, they're both a grease. Well, which was the one? Did one not move and the other one got bigger? Or did one, is it that, or I'm trying to think, would that make sense? Obviously, right? It could be one shrunk to a sela. Like you just don't know basically. So the issue is both, did they grow or did they shrink in terms of making them tahol? So they say, if you're not sure between these either 2 people or 2 marks on one person, if the kohen has a doubt, bitchila tahol. That means if it's to say someone became impure, they became a leper, if you have a doubt about whether it grew or not, based on what we just described, then you're basically going to say, we're going to keep you tahol. You're not going to be a leper. Again, it's the same idea of presumptive status. You were already in this status. We're going to keep you in the same status or status quo. Mishin is katlatuma svekotame. But once you're impure and we want to purify you and say, oh, it shrunk, if we're not sure if that one shrunk or that was just the one that was small to begin with, then basically we're going to say you're impure. You're not purified from being a leper. So the Gemara wants to find a source for this. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring some statement of Rav Yehuda Marav, a drasha of his, say that's where we learned it from. Then they're going to say, no, that doesn't work. That only teaches us half the Mishnah. That would basically say the opposite in the other case, and we would come to the wrong conclusion. And basically the drasha doesn't match the halacha. So then they basically are going to say that drasha you quoted Rav Yehuda Marav is actually talking about something else and not this. And then we're done. We don't end up with a source for this halacha, which is interesting. I mean, you could say it's just the halacha of status quo that we saw previously, but they don't bring a source for it from the Torah. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, the pasuk says, litaharo or litamo. This is a pasuk actually not, it's by leprosy, but by clothing. And it says there, this is the Torah, these are the rules for negat tzara, beged hatzemer or fishin or ashti, right? This kind of clothes or whatever. Or litaharo or litamo. Now notice it says to purify or to make it impure. So notice which comes first. Because it starts with tahara, first, we're going to be lenient and always say it's tahor. Normally, by the way, safek d'oraita l'chumra, right? So this is a unique halacha that when you're in doubt, we go l'taher, lenient. Well, the Gemara says, well then, the Mishnah should rule tahor in both cases, not based on what your status is. it should be no matter what. We have a doubt about leprosy, say you're tahor. If you are a leper, we say you got out of leprosy also. Because again, the Torah says so. So then remove this drasha from this halacha. It has nothing to do with our mission. It has to do with a different suffix about leprosy. Okay, another, which I didn't mention before, there's some other rules. You want to check that the leprous mark turned white and it grew a white hair, but it has to be in a particular order. We're going to learn right now. So what he said it was a haitmar on this halach. Im baheret kadma l'se'ar lavan. If first it turned white, then the white hair came out, tameh. Then it's impure. Im se'ar lavan kodem la baheret tahol. Okay, why this isn't not going to try to explain, right? These are just the laws they learn out from the Torah. If the white hair came before the mark turned white, then it's pure. That's not a leprous mark. What if it's a safek? What if you didn't know which came first? Then tameh. Then we're going to rule strictly. Rabbi Yoshua Omer keha. Nobody knows what this word keha meant. Okay, the root kehe usually means darker. Okay? Like a tseva bahil, tseva kehe, right? A light color or a dark color. So kehe means dark. So my kehe. So they say, what did Rabbi Yoshua mean when he said kehe? Amar Rav Yehuda, kehe v'tahol. We view the mark as if it was dark and it's pure. Okay, meaning that, right, we're looking for baheret kadma l'se'ar lavan. I'm sorry, we're looking for se'ar lavan kodem la baheret, right, which is first it was lavan and then it was baheret. So we're saying it was dark to begin with and then it became white, I guess, something like that. Again, there's many, many different interpretations of what this word kehe means. Some people explain it totally differently. So it's hard to understand that word, but anyway, he means you're pure. And then they say, v'doma kehe v'tameh. Why do you assume he meant kehe v'tahor? Maybe he meant kehe v'tameh. So in order to explain how we know Rabbi Yeshua was lenient here, comes Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav and says his drasha on this. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Amar Kral, l'taro l'tamo, ho'ilu b'tach b'achtu b'tara tchila. Since the pasuk says tara first, we're going to assume that at least somebody darshans here, we're going to make it tahor, because remember the rabbi said it's tameh. So comes Rabbi Yeshua and says, no, it's tahor, because look at this pasuk. That's the way they understand Rabbi Yeshua. Again, Rav, who says that Rabbi Yeshua said that, we don't really know. That's how he explains Rav. So now we're left with, for our question, we don't really have an answer to. Moving on to the next mission. Background for this mission. Zav. Zav is a person has a discharge from his body, a male. It's a clear discharge. And it's, as opposed to a woman who's a zava has bloody discharge, it's clear. It's called gonorrhea. It comes from having this disease called zav. Okay. Now, if the man has a discharge from something else, okay, or meaning something else external caused the person to have this discharge, like from food, or we're going to see there's 7 things that could potentially cause this discharge, or onus, right? Like something happened that caused it that wasn't from the sickness of zav, then it's not counted as a zav. Okay, so a man has a discharge after he ate certain foods that might cause that kind of discharge. So that's not called zav. However, depends for what. So another thing about zav you have to know is, we've talked about this a few times, but we'll keep reviewing it. Eventually it'll go into your head. Maybe it already did. A zav sees one time, one discharge. They're called a zav, that's like a zav katan. For a woman, it's called a zav katana. She bleeds 1 or 2 days for the woman. For the man, it's 1 day. You basically are only tameh for a day. You go to the mikveh and you wait till the sun sets and you're fine. You check to make sure you don't have another sighting of this, right? For the woman, it's 3 days in a row. For the man, it's 3 sightings. Okay? It doesn't matter. It could be within 1 day. I think it could be 1 day after the other. I forget that detail. But I think it could be within 3 days. You saw 3, I think. So now, if, let's say he goes to the mikveh, but then he sees again. So when he sees the second time, now he needs 7 clean days already. That's different from the woman. She only needs 7 clean days after 3 days in a row of bleeding. So the man sees 2. He already has to wait 7 clean days, but he doesn't need to bring a sacrifice. Only if he sees 3 discharges, then he needs to bring a sacrifice. So they're now going to distinguish between the first 2 and the third. Because once you have the first 2, you're already a zav gadol. You already need 7 clean days. And now we're going to say, for the first 2, in order to be determined that you're a real zav that needs 7 clean days, you're going to need them to be not these types. Okay? If it's from some external circumstance, you're not a zav. But the third one already, you're going to be a zav, even if it came from eating something, because we're going to say raglayim ledavar. Because you're already a zav gadol, we assume if you have another discharge, at this point, we're going to assume this. By the way, okay, the 3 is kind of like a chazaka, but there's sometimes in halacha where 2 is a chazaka, and here you see it where 2, first of all, there's a big machloket always. Is 2 a chazaka or is 3 a chazaka? So this seems to be showing that 2 already, you're already muchzak as a zav. So therefore, right, we see that all this stuff seems to be a lot of chazaka relating to the shuraglayim l'davar. B'shiv'a drachim, so let's read the Mishnah. In 7 ways, bodkim et hazav, ad shalom nizkak leziva. You check in 7 ways until he really actually is a zav. Again, once he's going to be really a zav, which is after 2 times, then already we're not going to check. Right? So you start asking, did you eat something that maybe causes? Did you drink something that causes? B'masad, did you carry something heavy? B'kfitzad, did you jump? By the way, with women, you might remember there's a source that talks about women jumping and causing her to menstruate. And that now there, we don't care. Any way you believe is going to be a problem. But by the zav, it's different. If because you jumped, caused this discharge, that's not zav. Ubecholi, you had a particular, you had a fever, let's say, that maybe caused it. Ubemareh, or you saw a beautiful woman, let's say, or you had thoughts about a woman, you didn't see her, but you just had thoughts about her. All those things could have caused this discharge, in which case we're not going to rule that you're a zav. But mishenizkat leziva, but once you already are called a zav, which means not 1, because that's only a zav, that you're only a zav for 1 day. But if you're already a zav that's going to need 7 days, then ein bodkinoto. So that's for view number 3. Onso usfeko v'shechvat zarot me'im. Okay, in all the cases of once you already have 2 riyot, ones, we're going to talk about what all these things are. Sveko, you have a doubt about it. Shechvat zaro, there's something we'll have to see about semen involved in it. We're going to have to explain all this in tomorrow's daf, which we'll get to at the siyum. Sheraglayim l'davar, always fun at the siyum to have one of these dafim. So we assume that since you're already, we'll see that there's this issue. If it comes out together with semen, you have a discharge of both a zav discharge and a semen discharge at the same time. Normally, we don't view that as a zav discharge, but in this case, since you're already a zav with 2 riyot, we're going to count it as a zav. Okay, and then again, that's going to mean you're now chayav a korban. That was a little out there. Now we're going to get to a really interesting case, which unfortunately the Gemara does not go into. Okay, but it happens to be a Mishnah in Sanhedrin also. So presumably, I don't remember the sugya. I'm sure they get into it in Sanhedrin. Very interesting case. Hamaket chaveron, unfortunately in Israel, very relevant, in other places as well, but often happens in terrorist incidents where somebody is, their situation is very difficult. They're in a matzav anush, they call it, right? A critical condition after a terrorist incident, let's say, for example. So somebody, maket chavero, v'amdu limitan, they say, oh, this guy's in critical condition, most likely he'll die. But he kill me mashaya. But then all of a sudden the situation improves, right? They stabilize, everything's good. And then la'achar mikein chvivim. But then a few weeks later, right, the situation gets worse and they die. So the big question is, was the person who did it originally responsible? You'll say, of course they're responsible, right? But according to Tanakama chayav, so of course they're responsible. This person died because of what happened. Rabbi Nechemia omer patul sheraglayim l'davar. It says, look, the person got better in the middle there. Because they improved, it must be something else that caused them to die. First of all, right, it could be an infection got in there, while they're... So, right, I understand this sounds very difficult, especially because I put it in light of a terrorist incident, which you would think, of course, they're responsible. But in any case, I want you to think about it. It's a very interesting thing to think about, right? Where you draw the line, right? And how you know whether that person was responsible or not. So that's a very interesting sugya, but you're going to have to wait till Masechet Sanhedrin to get into it. So the first thing we're going to do in the Gemara is explain Minahani Milei. This halacha about the third Riyah being different than the first 2, where do we get it? Amar Rabbi Natan Amar Kha, the pasuk says, okay, we'll read the whole pasuk. V'adavar b'nidata v'azav etzavo, a woman in nida and a person who has a zav discharge, la zachar v'la nekeva, for the male and for the female. I'm not going to read the rest of the pasuk. That's enough for right now. So what they're going to say is the following: Hazav et zovo is 2, zav and zovo. That already is a reference to first riyah, second sighting of a discharge. L'riyah shlishit itakash l'nekeva. When you get to the word la zachar v'la, you must be talking about the third sighting. So I'm calling it a sighting because it says riyah, okay, but the third discharge, let's say. It's only going to be relevant if you see it. That's why it's important to call it a sighting. But the third discharge, it's already compared to a woman. Now, a woman, if she bleeds, it doesn't matter why she bleeds. Like I said before, it doesn't matter if she's bleeding because she was sick or she jumped or she has a roommate whose period it wasn't, right? It doesn't make a difference. She's bleeding, she's bleeding. So they say, therefore, it doesn't matter where the third riyah comes from. Now they say, but wait a minute. So now we said, right, first, second, and third. Now we're going to talk about a fourth. What's a fourth? A fourth is you saw 3, you're waiting now 7 clean days. Well, what if you see within the 7 clean days? So there's certain things that will say, okay, this doesn't count as a clean day, but you can continue. Let's say on day 4, you see something, okay? Then it doesn't count. You don't count day 4, but you continue with day 4 tomorrow. Okay, different from women, right? You start from the beginning, but it depends what kind of a discharge. If it's a zav discharge, you have to start from the beginning. If let's say it's shichat zera, it's just semen, then it's not. Okay, so it's different for laws for women and men in this way. But the question is this law of it doesn't matter where it came from, it's considered a zav, is that talking about for the 3rd or for the 4th? So Rabbi, they say now, our Mishnah goes against this brighta, Tanya, Rabbi Lezer Omer, b'shlishit bodkinoto. The 3rd, you still check what it came from. But Rabbi'it ain't bodkinoto. Once you're already, and this is again, it sounds like chazaka is 2 or chazaka is 3. Rabbi Lezer says, no, until you get to 3, you're not muhzak, even though you are a zav, but you're still not zav chayav and korban. To get to that 3rd one, put you over the edge, you need a real zav re'iyah and not one that's for one of these other external factors. But when it comes to the 4th one, declaring is this a zav discharge or not, then it doesn't matter anymore, because then you're really muhzak. So they say, there's a machloket tanaim here, obviously, between Rabbi Eliezer and our Mishnah. And they say, what's their machloket based on? That's what they're really trying to say is, how did you learn it from that pasuk? Because Rabbi Eliezer gets to 4. Where does he get to 4 from that pasuk? Simple answer. You might not have noticed, but there's a word et in that pasuk. Hazav et zavo. It's usually a word we kind of ignore. But Rabbi Eliezer darshans etim. So Rabbi Eliezer darish etim. Rabbanan lo darish etim. So hazav et zavo is, zav is 1, et is 2, zavo is 3. When you get to lazachar, you're already up to 4. So when it comes to 4, zachar is like in a keva where it doesn't matter where it comes, what the source is from. But according to Tanakama, it does. And then, right, the 3rd one is already going to make a difference, right? It's already doesn't matter the 3rd one, okay, not the 4th one. So because he doesn't darshan etim, and that's how he gets to lazachar v'lem keva is the 3rd and not the 4th. Okay, so quick review of our daf. We started with this whole law of shkunat parot and when you can remove their bodies from places, when you can't. Again, it wasn't 100% clear all the details in the Gemara, which cases yes, which cases no, and exactly what goes with what. And we learned the law of tefusa. We learned it from Yaakov when he gets buried. We learned there's a machloket tanaim about what exactly is tefusa, how much do you remove. And then we went into what if you remove 2, what happens to the 3rd when you find the 3rd, and different halachot of that. Then we went to the safek nigayim, where we basically say your presumptive, your status quo remains if you're not sure. And then we tried to prove it from a pasuk. We couldn't prove it from the pasuk because the pasuk says l'ta'alo. It should be l'taher in either case, and not to keep you tamei if we're not sure if you really got out of it or not. So then they said, oh yeah, that pasuk actually is teaching us something else about if the seir lavan came before the beheret came before lavan. We're not sure. Then we always go leniently. Again, only according to Rabbi Yoshua, and he learns it from that pasuk. Then we brought this Mishnah about the zav and talked about the 2 riyot and the 3 riyot, and we use this raglayim ledavar to explain why the 3rd riyot would be different, because you're already, as we say, muhzak as a zav, you're already a zav who needs 7 clean days. So once that, anything you see after, we're going to assume it doesn't matter what the source of it was from. But to get to 1 and 2, you're going to need one that doesn't come from any external factors. What we'll do tomorrow, or right at the siyum, we'll figure out on so, sveko, shechat zaro, and all those, what did those terms mean? And then we'll go to the next mission, as I promised, about Shmuel and Nazirut, and get back to more grounded topics, more topics that we can relate to a little bit better. Again, reminder, if you're in Israel, there's a bunch of siyums around. You should look on the Hebrew site to see. If you're in Manhattan, Tal Shabbat is speaking, so make sure to get there on Thursday night. And the siyum, for anyone who can't make it to the Zoom siyum, which will be Thursday night, 8:30 Israel time, depending on where you live, where it will be by you. If you can't make it, you can always listen online. It will all be up online after the siyum Thursday night. And then over time, it will be broken up into parts so that you can just look at one part of the siyum. Looking forward to seeing you all there. And if you want to watch the Hebrew one, it'll be up already starting tomorrow. By tonight, it'll be up on the site. Have a great day, everyone.